Hello, America. Dave Hodges here. I'm the host of the Common Sense Show. We are the show that is freeing America one enslaved mind at a time. Thank you so much for joining us. And sometimes to look forward, you first have to look back. And this almost sounds like I'm patting myself on the back, and I am not. I promise you I'm not. But there is a deliberate effort out there right now to repress this knowledge. And I understand why, because it threatens the public confidence in a long established business interest, establishment. It's people aren't believing what they're being told across a number of fronts. I mean, just with the assassination, oh, that's what one person said, just with the accidental death of Lindsey Graham. And honestly, I don't know anything about this. I'm not taking sides. I have no idea. But I've already seen now, we're not even 24 hours into this, and somebody has already been promoting, and it's being done too in some reputable publications, that they suspect foul play with Lindsey Graham. Isn't that interesting? This is how distrustful we are. I have no information on that whatsoever. And I can tell you this, President Trump is losing sleep over this because he needs Lindsey Graham in the Senate. They are peas in a pod. They were joined at the hip. And this is devastating for President Trump. So I saw one thing where it said, well, he wasn't serving Trump's interests, so they had to get rid of him. How ridiculous is that? That doesn't even make sense on the surface. But we are in an age now where we don't trust much of anything. And I keep going back to this, and please hear me clearly. It's my strongly held belief, and you have to come to this decision on your own free will, that the only place to put your trust is in the Lord Jesus Christ, and then all things will be added to you. And I'm not surprised by the level of mistrust, but it is shocking compared to what it used to be. And if we look at what caused mistrust to begin to surface in this country, it was the Kennedy assassination. Now, we had other periods where we went through extreme upheaval, like we had a civil war. But in terms of the modern era, if you look at where people were before and where they ended up after, it was a shocking revelation. And I'm going to talk to you about that event. And then we're going to do a second follow-up today where we're going to look back on something I said a year ago. And I'm going to play a fairly lengthy clip of that and say, tell me this isn't true. And I'm going to make a comment first about when I put out some work yesterday. The Cantillon effect is real. And it's about, you know, when you're going through money transitions like we are, the people that make the money are at the top. They're the ones who get the money, make the money, distribute the money, and the first generation of people that get that money ended up making lots of money and they make it in assets. The people that pay the price for that transition are the wage earners, fixed income, savings account people, and lower level stockholders and so forth. And that's called the Cantillon effect, and it's well known. It's affected actually to Sarah Westall's intelligence, and she doesn't need any boost from me on that point. But I just mentioned to her, yeah, I just did something on the effect, and she goes, oh yeah, and then she started talking about it. It's well known. It's well known. But here's what's interesting. Yesterday, this went out on a couple of podcasts. Numbers went through the roof. On social media, repressed to levels I've never seen. Views in the hundreds. And this isn't an ego statement. It's a what some people may not want you to see statement. And I thought, okay, well, we need to bring more light to this. So I'm going to ask you on this and what we did yesterday, which got minuscule coverage in social media. I'm asking you to take those and spread them far and wide because what that does is allow people to begin to make proper preparations to deal with the challenges. I'm not interested in promoting in the conspiracy theory or anything like that. I'm just saying this economy is in trouble. Games are being played by certain people. And let's put it this way, strategies are being implemented that aren't in your best interest if you're middle class. They're not. And most of you who come here, vast majority, you are middle class. A lot of you who come here, you're getting close to or in retirement range. And this is devastating to you because you don't have a lot of wiggle room to increase income at this point. And so I can see why some people like to throttle this information. So you just walk into the little trap, they use your money, your standard of living goes lower. And this is exactly what is happening. And it's just a matter of fact. And the thing is, I like to see though, is I did a research and I saw that these views in social media were down so far. I went and did some research on well, how much of this is being covered by other people. And I reached out to a couple of them, and I'm actually thinking about doing a roundtable on this. They said the same thing. Say, yeah, I do something on NASA's coverage of UFOs, okay, and then congressional testimony to accompany that. Views are pretty good. If you talk about restarting the war and what are the options and likely to go, the views are pretty good. But when you talked about the Cantillon effect, and how it's coming into play, and private equity is largely behind it. I'm talking BlackRock, Blackstone, State Street, Vanguard, and so forth. Those views get throttled. Whoa, amazing. And they're fairly sensitive too about the Kirk trial. And oh my goodness gracious, if you saw the piece I did yesterday, and I think this bears repeating, I was talking to a family member who's a diehard Fox News can say nothing wrong and they're perfect and so forth and so on. And they say that the trial is absolutely perfect and proving things beyond a shadow of a doubt. And I said this, I said, do you think a crime scene where you're looking for ballistic fragments and other things could be associated with a killing, do you think that should be preserved for a fairly good length of time and the area cordoned off? Yellow police tape? Well, yes, of course. Well, how long do you think that the crime area was cordoned off? I don't know. I said, neither did the lead investigator. What? I said, yeah. And I told the story. I watched the lead investigator's testimony in the trial, and he didn't know when they had cordoned off the crime scene, and it was less than 48 hours. And we know because the contractors come forward and talked about that. He said, we don't work on Sundays, but we did. Okay. And this is just amazing. He said, I think it was a few days. And then they asked lead investigator David Hull at that point. He said, well, how'd you find out that the crime scene was paved over and unsecured? Oh, I found out about it in the news media. Huh? See, this is the stuff that some people who have a vested interest don't want you to see. They don't want you to hear this. Yet this was court testimony, and I played the testimony. It wasn't, I got it, third person, I repeated it, I played it. You saw it firsthand, defense attorney to lead investigator. Oh, and he was taken out of his position and kicked upstairs to the position of basically what we'd call internal affairs, reviewing the legitimacy of certain policemen's actions. More money? Oh my. And then two other investigators were asked similar questions. And it was the same clown show. It really was. I was so distressed. Anyway, I digress on that point. I would appreciate if you'd go back and look at the fact that I covered the Cantillon effect. I covered the trial. I also interviewed the chief operating officer of Ironhawk Financial, and I'm telling you, people are escaping this devastating economy where really we're entering into stagflation of the 70s. And people are escaping it by using the strategies of Ironhawk Financial. And if you're in the bank and you want to keep people's money in the bank so you pay them less than 1% interest while you've got a 3 to 5% inflation rate, remember, they don't count the price of gas or food in core inflation. And so it's probably more like about 6 to 7%, and it's going to go up. And we covered in that interview, as well as other things I said yesterday, that they have announced, and I'm going to say this very clearly. I don't care if you're Kevin Bessent of the Treasury, if you were Janet Yellen, his predecessor in the Treasury, and also former Fed chair, or Kevin Warsh, who's the current head Fed chair, they're all saying the same thing. They're going to make inflationary practices devalue the debt. So the real cost of the debt has gone down, even though the numbers say it's the same, but they're going to do it on your backs. In other words, bond yields have to stay below inflationary rates. interest rates on passbook accounts, for example, have to stay below inflationary rates. And the difference devalues the overall debt, national debt. And this process takes about 10 years, given the fact that the one time we did it before was in 1946. And it worked. We went from a GDP to, debt ratio of 121% to 65%. That was a good move, but the people suffered. But here was a buffer the people had after World War II. The world was in ruins except for the United States. And I'm talking about the industrialized economies. They were in ruins. The US, after World War II, was producing 90 to 95% of all manufactured goods. We had 90% of the automobiles, 90% of the phones. I mean, we had everything. So we had a buffer that could shield the fact that your savings account, all right, your Social Security, your whatever account was funding to take down the debt so the economy didn't collapse. But our rising standard of living, which was unprecedented in the history of the world, was the buffer against that. So Americans had the perception, happy days are here and it's going to be just roses and wine and it's just wonderful. And that was the debt. We don't have that buffer today. We live in a declining economy. No, it's not Chicken Little and the sky is falling, but we are declining. Our rate of manufacturing per capita is down compared to what the rest of the world is up because we offshore so many things. Now, get your mind around that for a second. I'm not even saying anything's wrong with that, but I'm telling you why we don't have the buffer of the people in the 40s and the 50s to handle this strategy. And it's the Cantillon effect because here's the deal. You're not going to see Bezos. You're not going to see Elon Musk or any of these other people suffer any kind of economic downturn. In fact, quite the opposite. They know that they can't be in these instruments like bonds and treasuries and so forth, and they're going to be in hard assets like real estate. And they know that's where the money is. A lot of people don't have the money to do this in the middle class. 65% of America, and I can't say this too often, can't afford a $500 car repair bill, according to the research from the government. Now, having said that, we have zero buffer, and yet we're having assets stripped away to pay down the national debt at citizens' expense for decisions they did not make. No one asked us if we wanted a war with Iran. No one asked us if we should basically give away our missile industry to Ukraine to fight against Russia. I'm not even arguing legitimacy. I'm saying you had no choice in this. No one asked you your permission about COVID era policies that sent inflation to 13% and real inflation, really count gas and food, probably closer to 18%. Nobody asked you about those policies. Those were made at the top. And were there people that made money on these policies? Of course there were. They were the equity investors into the military industrial complex, and the manufacturers of the military industrial complex made a lot of money. And the banks make a lot of money. And you are the ones that pay for that. You're paying for the wealthy to get wealthier. And no, I'm not a socialist because socialism never works. It ends with body bags. It's kind of funny. When they took down the Berlin Wall, did people instantly run to the communist side? Exactly. They moved west. Go west, young man. West Berlin, West Germany. This is why I don't endorse socialism ever, but we have crony capitalism in this country with huge antitrust law violations. I go back to this, and I've told you this before. The 70s, you had Ma Bell. Well, Ma Bell was a monolithic monopoly that charged outrageous long distance rates for a 3-minute call, given what the economy was at the time. And it was a monopoly. There was no competition. So the government says, we're breaking this up, and they invoke the Sherman and Clayton Antitrust Act. And we have some competition, and we do see some competition even today. I mean, I know there's some collusion among the phone carriers, but there is competition, and it does pay to shop. And I just made a purchase of a new phone because I got to this point where my old phone, I was just fine with an S10. Well, I know you had a dinosaur, Dave, but I was fine with it, except the battery was a bunch of crap. And to replace the battery was at such a cost, it made more sense to buy a new phone. It's interesting how it gets priced that way, isn't it? So I got the new S26. It's not top of the line. It's good enough for what I need. And in some of the things I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be taking photographs and publishing them. Yeah, in interest of the professions that I'm in and to help me tell better stories. So that phone's just fine. But here's the problem. A lot of the carriers had similar deals, and I had to actually sit there and decipher. And you know what I finally did? Confession, I used AI. I put it into AI. I said, tell me the difference between these. And they came to the same conclusion, actually, that my wife was telling me and my son was telling me this is the way to go. So there's competition in the phone industry, but there is no competition in the banking industry. There is no competition in private equity. BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, all interlocked in various ways that I've covered before. They control 90% of all asset management in the United States and 75% worldwide. That is a monopoly that needs to be broken up today. Well, okay, we'll wait until the first business day of the new session of Congress. But really, if they broke up Ma Bell, this is worse. This is worse than Ma Bell by far. But no one will touch it because we have crony capitalism now. And I honestly think, and I look at this as a Christian, I tend to ask this question. If Jesus were here today, would he turn the tables over and run people out of the, you know, banking industry? Would he do that? I think the situation today is as bad as it was in biblical times. And yet we seem to be content just to accept it the way it is. And I'm tired of it. I'm going to give you another practice, and this is all leading up to a central question I'm going to ask you. If you get a dollar, can you duplicate that dollar 9 times and then loan that out at an interest rate? Well, you say, if I could, Dave, I'd never have to worry about income again. Exactly. But see, this is exactly what the Federal Reserve is allowed to do in a practice they call fractional reserve banking. And if you've not heard this before and you weren't taught this in your history, government, or economics class, you should go look it up. Fractional reserve banking. Now, the amount varies. It can be 12 to 1, it can be 8 to 1. And there's different guidelines for this, but it doesn't matter if it's 2 to 1. But they're printing money out of thin air that doesn't need to be printed because it's inflationary on its face with nothing backing it. And then they're making money off this practice. It's a monopoly game that's rigged. And I'm talking the old board game Monopoly. It's a rigged game. That kind of stuff sends you to prison. If you just share an insider in fact about a stock, hey, I work at this company. Ooh, you won't believe what's in it. This is going to be the next big thing. And you go buy the stock, or you tell a relative or friend that goes and buys the stock, you're going to jail for insider trading. But if you're a member of Congress, it's perfectly legal. Just ask Nancy Pelosi, who's made $250 million doing this. In fact, I believe I don't know the website. I should probably look into this. A Nancy Pelosi, a PelosiWatch.com site, something like that. And they watch what she does with stock and imitate it because they figure most of it's insider trading and she's going to win. Isn't that interesting? Why should that be allowed to happen? Rules for thee and not for me, monopolies that exist in the face of the law. Here's the purpose of my show. One, we defend God, family, country, and I hope people see the value of God in some of the things that we put out. And we don't preach. I'm not a pastor, but I make a lot of scriptural references. That's number one. Number two, I want our country to do well, but I want it to do well the right way, not just for the benefit of the rich. And that's what's happening right now with the Cantillon effect. I want our families to do well. Well, When God's taken out of society, like the Democratic Party voted out God years ago out of their party platform, when God's taken out of society and they make it illegal to pray in public classrooms, and you see right now the lawsuits in Texas where they say you can actually teach from the Bible. Well, the Bible, first of all, is history. Even if you took out the Christian connotation of it, it's still history. Yet there are people that are suing the state of Texas for doing what I think is really the right thing to do. Our faith is under attack. Our families are under attack. Parental authority has been undermined in many, many ways in which it's not scriptural, it's not even legal. It's making up laws on the it's unconstitutional. And we've gone through a lot of those things. I want a government that follows the rules, and I don't expect it to be perfect, and I don't expect there to be zero corruption. I'm a realist, but I do expect there to be a good faith effort to do so. And that's not happening. Government is owned by corporations and foreign interests because the people in government follow the money are being funded to a level that you can't. You're wasting your money when you fund a political campaign. You're wasting your money. Take your family out to dinner before you make another political contribution because your money is a grain of sand on the beach compared to what the politicians are getting. And it's only when the people rise up in mass with a singular issue does government back down. And that's the only time. If you took, and here's where I'm going to go with this, if you took corporations out of the political process, if you didn't allow APAC to donate to 94% of all congressmen, all senators, political campaigns, 94% are on the APAC payroll, unregistered foreign lobby from Israel, which is illegal on its face. They don't register with FARA, the Foreign Agent Registration Act. They're the only ones in the country that don't have to register as a foreign lobby. So therefore, they can obscure what they're doing. When you're under FARA, you have to precisely state your goals. And if you're found to violate that, boom, you lose your status, you're done. You can't operate in the United States. They get to circumvent that. So then we wonder why we're doing things like allowing Israel to merge their military with ours in Section 224 of the National Defense Authorization Act. And as much as we've talked about this, I still run into a lot of friends that have never heard of this. Dave, that just can't be. They would never do that. And I say, rather than have a debate, I'm not going to have a debate and feelings get heated. Rather than do that, just go look up NDAA slash section 224. All I ask you to do is look that up and then look up how Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna, Republican Democrat, introduced an amendment to block that merger, and they couldn't even get a hearing on the amendment. It's all public record. Does that work in the best interest of the country? Remember, we're about God, family, country. Does that work in the best interest of our country to merge our military? It's your tax dollars that are paying for the great research to go on to give us superior weapons to maintain our freedom. And we're just going to hand it off to a foreign nation that has shown that they did not respect the peace process that President Trump tried to engage in. They continually pounded sites and attacked personnel in Lebanon, undermining the peace agreement. I don't trust Iran. That's not the point. The point is we have an ally that we're helping, and they won't even cooperate with the peace agreement, which is initiated inside this country, yet they want access to all our military secrets. Does that make any sense to you? And this is why I feel compelled to keep doing what I'm doing. Now, I'll tell you another thing here too. I believe God has spoken to my heart to tell you that we are entering the beginning of the digital age, which could culminate in the beast system talked about in Revelation 18, where you can't buy or sell. I have a real problem walking away from this responsibility. But when I talk to you about things like the Cantillon effect, which is setting this up to where you don't have resources to resist the system, where you won't be able to get outside the system, and they're doing everything they can do to keep you inside the system. Do you want to know what they're doing to keep you inside the system, ladies and gentlemen? Listen to me and listen to me very, very carefully. They are keeping you inside the system by making you dependent. And by watching every move you make, cataloging every phone call, flock cameras follow you, the ring doorbells from the time that you leave your house in the morning, you go to work, you stop at the gym, you go to a movie, you are cataloged everywhere, along with your credit card expenditures. And now we're going cashless in so many venues. I remember I was shocked. I went to a Diamondbacks baseball game. I pulled out a $20 bill to pay for a hot dog and a Coke expecting change. Oh, we don't take cash. What? And I found out that's true in most professional sports now. Really? Well, that credit card catalogs everything you're doing. Did you know that? Wire transfers. And everybody has, and we've had people from NSA talk about this to us. They catalog everything. They know everything about you. And one, it's sold to businesses and they make money. It's funny how the government's actually been a broker in this, but they'll sell it to the businesses so the businesses can better market you to your appealed interest, and you'll be likely to spend money on targeted advertising. Want an example of that? You're sitting at the dinner table with your family. We need to go somewhere good on vacation. Little kid speaks up, Daddy, I want to go to a theme park. I love the roller coaster. And within an hour, everyone's internet on their phones is filled up with something about Disneyland or Disney World or Six Flags. Isn't it funny how that works that way? And then when you do things to block privacy invasion, you go to jail. Keanu Rodriguez, I'll tell his story coming up sometime this week. You do things to obscure what you're doing just because you want privacy. You're breaking no law. If you're big enough, you're a little guy, they're probably going to leave you alone. But if you're making a VPN that really works, if you're engaged in a crypto sale where you really want the ledger not to be public and people can participate secretly. And you know what really stinks about this? Yes, you can have money laundering in something like this. I agree with that observation. But you can criminalize everything. A hammer can be used for construction purposes. It can be used as a weapon. The same thing is true with privacy tools. But one thing too is if you have your financial movements as a person watched and surveilled, your opposition can anticipate your next move in a business sector. I think privacy should be guaranteed. And I also believe your data is your own. Now, there was a Ninth District Court opinion years ago about Facebook, and people sued because Facebook was taking data belonging to the people and selling it. And I agree with the court decision because they said when you put that on Facebook, you give them carte blanche. There's nothing in there that says you're protected. But I do believe that the invasive methods that are being used to extract your data without your participation, you sign no terms of service to agree to this. That should be your property. But people are capitalizing on your life and not capitalizing, not necessarily taking advantage, but taking advantage financially to profit on your data so they can anticipate trends from your data. That's your property. Your data is your property. This coffee cup is my property. Your data is your property. And this leads me to the final chain in this, because I've covered a lot of topics. This is all under the heading if I want government to be responsive and respect people and their trends, their privacy trends. I fear a society that the Bible talks about. How could you, if you don't take the mark, how could that actually be enforced? Because today, if you don't like the dollar, you can go crypto, you can go gold, you can go to Iron Hawk Financial, which really everyone should look at. I'm telling you right now, the people who are doing the Iron Hawk Financial thing, if I digress for a second, it takes you, as Marianne from Iron Hawk said yesterday, anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months to go through the process because they dot every I, cross every T. No government regulator can say you're doing something wrong. It's perfectly orchestrated. But people that are doing this get back to me and say thank you. In fact, their best agents have come from my audience. That's right. People have done it. Oh, it works. I'm going to help other people. See, you can get outside the system that way. But if you go to Mark of the Beast, you can't buy or sell. That means there is no getting outside the system. So gold, crypto, Ironhawk Financial aren't three escape valves. Something's been done to block you. Rather than okay, so I'll just grow my own food. Well, what if they outlaw that? And drone surveillance, satellite surveillance punishes the offenders. Sounds kind of like a big HOA, doesn't it? But you've got that against you that they're going to do things to outlaw anything else but the mark they say you need to buy or sell. That has to be digital. It has to be on a universal platform. Otherwise, it can't be enforced because people will have alternatives. If you make all the alternatives unavailable or so illegal, people are afraid to use them, and you're locked into the mark of the beast, and that beast is embedded in your right hand or your forehead, you got a real problem. Then you've got to, yeah, that guy that just came down from a UFO, that is Jesus Christ. And people start coming to those conclusions so they can eat, so they can do business. And this is what scares me about the digital age, because number one, what have I covered? It's a monopoly. Number two, how do you get something like this incorporated? You have to convince the rich, who then control the government through campaign donations and enforce their will on us. And it's a social economic view of the Cantillon effect, top-down wealth, and you're going to pay for it. Or in this case, you won't necessarily pay for it so much in finance, although I think you will. You're going to pay for it in compliance, in your Christian faith, in your personal beliefs. No thoughts, actions, or deeds are allowed without the permission of the beast. And we're approaching this right now. We're inducing helplessness on this country on a scale we've never seen before. Just owning your home. You don't own your home. Hello? My home's paid off. Mine is, but I know I don't own it. Oh, 2 months into not paying my property tax, I'm going to get my first letter. You know what the penalties are, Mr. Hodges? You better pay. And by the way, here's an interest charge. And then by the third month, you could be out of your house. You never own your home with a property tax. The government is your co-tenant, and you're the one that puts the bill for the agreement to be a tenant, co-tenant. And if you don't fulfill your 100% obligation to the government, they take your property away from you, sell it for a little profit, and allow their investor friends to jack up that price because they never sell it for the real value and make money selling it at a regular price on the market. You do not own your home. Do not. And this is true for everything that we have. I mean, now they're putting kill switches in cars. So you must do everything they say, whatever that's going to be, both present and future, or they'll just shut your car down. This is the trend, people. This is absolutely the trend. And, you're not being told about it. And I'll go back to another monopoly that was formed. In 1996, Bill Clinton did away with the regulation from the FCC that said if you owned a radio station in Chicago, you also couldn't own another radio station, nor could you own a TV station, nor could you own a newspaper for profit. Yeah. And we had 155 companies dominating 95% of the media market. There was real competition. There was competition to break a story first that was revealing about some scandal, like a Watergate or the Pentagon Papers. Today, that number, because of what Clinton did, has shrunk to two, three, six. Six corporations own 98% of the media. And it's interesting because people reject the media like crazy. They reject it. They want nothing to do with it. I mean, you look at CNN, their numbers are so bad, you wonder if it's only on to serve as a nightlight at midnight. This is nuts what's going on with the media. It's failing spectacularly. But what's replacing it? Well, people like me who want God, family, country. The media has earned a big distrust, and rightfully so, because they've been caught in so many lies. I mean, you take Rachel Maddow, the Russian collusion delusion. President Trump is nothing but a Russian agent. And General Flynn, who, by the way, I know, and he's as honorable in person as he is publicly. I can tell you that. We've encountered each other at the Clark conferences I spoke at. He was a frequent guest. He paid the price politically and professionally and personally. And he fell on his sword for President Trump. So I'm not going to fight this and give attention to it and blah, 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 because they're going to try to spread this more to the president than they already have. And so he walked away, having done nothing wrong. Nothing. Russian collusion delusion. And we learned how it's orchestrated. Obama, Hillary Clinton, James Comey, all were part of this and the manipulation that went on. And then we find out it's a house of cards and there was a big nothing about nothing. And President Trump was untouched. And President Trump, please, would you please expose this to greater detail than you have? I know the statute of limitations is probably expired, but these people got away with something that should never happen to any president. And it was directed at you, Mr. President, and I can't believe you're not going after this. So we have total dishonesty in the media, and you just see company lines. You know what you get when you turn on Fox. Trump is wonderful, and Charlie Kirk was killed by a guy with a weapon that would have taken his head off, and they paved over the crime scene in 48 hours. Yeah, that's all good, according to Fox. CNN, you know what you're going to get. Anything that puts Trump in a negative light, it's okay. Now it's Caitlin Clark, by the way. She gets punched in the throat, kneed in the groin, and pushed off on in a pile up to go with all the other physical assaults she suffered. And CNN says she brings it on herself. She's the problem. Like somehow violence is justified. You know what you get with these entities. So what comes along? Well, people like me. But what happens in the social media stratosphere? Extreme repression, algorithms. There's a lawsuit about this right now. We'll see where it ends up. We'll see where it ends up. But regardless, there's one truth. Doesn't lie in the alternative media. Certainly doesn't lie in the mainstream media. It's the word of God. This is what you should trust. And I'm going to set this down just for a second because I'm going to tell you where we lost it in this country, and this is where I started. John Kennedy was assassinated by people that had agendas. And all you have to know is what changed after he died. Well, we got Vietnam. We got a great increase in military spending. The silver certificate that was competing with the Federal Reserve totally went away. Israel got nuclear weapons when they didn't want them. I don't know that Israel is a part of this, but they benefited from it. And then I could keep going on. I mean, it's just people looked at it, and about 90% of the country thought it was Lee Harvey Oswald. But then there were people like my friend, the late Jim Mars, Josiah Thompson, many others that said, I see some problems, inconsistencies here. It reminds me of the Charlie Kirk situation today. And they started researching this and started raising really good questions. And we ended up with a forensic debate, the timing problem, what kind of bullet? How do you lose the president's brain in an autopsy? And you want to parallel to Charlie Kirk? Did you know that President Kennedy's brain disappeared? Yeah. Yeah. To me, it's because it couldn't be forensically examined because of the type of bullet that was used. Now we see in the Charlie Kirk preliminary hearing, to be technically accurate, we see that the bullet can't be matched, so they call it inconclusive. That's their definition. Okay, but we know a 30-06 didn't do that. Okay, and also to cover up any ballistic information, they pave over the crime scene within 48 hours. And with Kennedy, we see the same thing. There was a missing shot that clipped the curb, and we have everything we know about this. In fact, it was actually a sheriff's deputy that was involved in this. And the bullet that missed hit a man in the cheek on the ricochet. This is in the media, it's in media archives. And what did the government do? They came in and they had this big, almost ceremonial atmosphere. They dug up and separated the curb by about 6 inches long. And then they sent it to the National Archives. When people wanted to examine it, they said, well, we had to destroy it. And you know the reason they gave for destroying it? Because this 6 inch block was taking up too much space. That was the official explanation. And that's what Jim Mars told me. That was his magic moment to know that we were being lied to about Kennedy. Okay, and now we go through in 1977, we had the Special Assassinations Committee from the House, and they concluded there was a second shooter based on forensic recordings. Okay, well, that kind of destroys your lone nut assassin theory now, doesn't it, Warren Commission? And then we go forward another 13 years, and Oliver Stone, great patriot, he came up with the movie JFK and set it all together. My friend Jim Mars was a consultant in that movie. And by the way, the script for the movie was stolen 3 times. Yeah, and then not just Jim wasn't the only one talking about it. Jack Lemmon, who was in the movie, he talked about that too. Oliver Stone has talked about that. Now, let's go to 1990 from 1963. 90% of the people believe Lee Harvey Oswald did it. By 1990, they know he didn't do it. 90%. Now, there's been CIA's done some things since then to bring that number down into the 70s. But the vast majority of the people don't believe the Kennedy assassination conclusions. Even those that weren't alive at that time that bothered to look at it, they go, there's no way that that original story is true. This is why people don't trust. And the Kennedy assassination was really the sine qua non on how American public opinion switched. And then you get into a war we're lied into with Vietnam. And we know the Gulf of Tonkin incident, 800 miles away from Southeast, well, from South Vietnam. We know it didn't happen the way they said it happened. But we use that as the excuse to move troops 500 miles away. You get the idea. It's just ridiculous. And then we never fought the war to win. Ask anyone who fought there. Ask anyone who fought there. When they'd have victory within their grasp, something would happen. Now, it's not the privates and the sergeants that really look at this. This is the colonels and the generals who've spoken out about this after the fact. And they have to be careful because they go too far, they can be brought back in and court-martialed. Yeah, we've had a number of them say that. This is why people don't trust the government because that period of time, the coming out party for the deep state was the assassination of JFK and the subsequent cover-up by Alan Dulles. How does someone lead a commission for fact-finding when he was fired as CIA director for lying to the president and engaging in an illegal operation? How does he end up in charge of the investigation for the guy who fires him? And people ask me, Dave, how are you sure that this whole Charlie Kirk situation is just so much mess and a lot of untruth? I think because I look so hard at the Kennedy assassination, I see similar patterns repeating. I want justice for Charlie, and if it was this lone nut assassin, good. Let's find out what motivated him. We don't want any more events like this. But I don't see it that way. And because I don't see it that way, well, in some medias, you get discriminated against. I just want the truth for Charlie. Charlie and I shared a common bond. We didn't like Arizona elections, and as history has shown now, for good reason. And we had that bond, and I knew this man's heart was pure. He loved God. He loved this country. He wanted young people to be able to participate fully in this country, and that was his mission. And now I look at what he left behind. The mission at TPUSA is not what Charlie wanted, who is also turning away from the manipulation of Israel. And now they're totally, I hate to say the phrase, a Zionist organization. And this is why they're falling into disrepute, because this is becoming obvious. And it all sums up to one thing. Does your nation serve the people? Is it a virtuous nation? The way that we historically defined virtue in this country was you were God-fearing. This is our DNA from our inception. And in many circles that count, God's not even considered. And what I really fear is that we'll ultimately end up being a nation in judgment. But it doesn't have to be that way, because Nineveh was Sodom and Gomorrah of its time. But when they were brought the word, even to the leaders, they repented, and Nineveh was spared. And the angels and God rejoiced. We can be Nineveh, or we can be Sodom and Gomorrah. We have a choice. And if we tolerate lies about Charlie's situation, if we tolerate a duplicitous financial system that benefits one segment and there's not equal opportunity for all, if we tolerate fractional reserve banking, if we tolerate one nation dominating our nation with campaign donations so we merge our militaries to the detriment of the people, if we tolerate these things, if we tolerate not respecting life, if we tolerate taking away parental authority, if we tolerate taking God out of the classroom, out of society, out of political parties, if we tolerate that, we are inviting God's judgment. And if that's not right, I would say do an historical search on what I've just said and then come back and tell me that I'm incorrect. The problem is today is we're into being our own God. And thou shalt have no gods before me, no other gods. This is the answer. We live out biblical principles to do these crazy, sinful things that we do as a nation don't make any sense, and then we stop doing them. Otherwise, many people feel, I don't know if this is true, but many people feel we're the new Babylon. I don't know if it's new Babylon, but I'll say this. I see signs we're a nation under judgment, and I see God is still being patient with this nation and allowing us an opportunity to repent and go in another direction. But it starts, I believe, you have to reform the money changers. You have to make government pure. And here's how I do it. And I'll just say this so clearly. I've said it before. No foreign investment into political campaigns. If you do it, it's felony, and you're automatically out of office if you receive it, and you are prosecuted. No corporate campaign donations, because the word of the people doesn't matter. I'm telling you right now, you waste your money when you donate to a political campaign that means anything. It may mean something in a city council race, okay, but it doesn't mean anything when the stakes are high and the political position is high enough. I mean, like in Congress, you can spend tens of millions to run for a seat that pays 200,000 a year. So if you serve out your 2-year term, that's a $400,000 payday for a $10 million campaign debt. Money has to come from somewhere to make that up, and then the money owns that vote. You don't. That's why we have to take the corporations out of this. I'm in favor of publicly funded campaigns equally to the qualified candidates, equally. Limit how much each person can give, maybe to just $100, So even the more meager of us has an ability to have some kind of financial input into the saying of how our government's run, and you get the money out of the system as much as you can. The other side would freak out in panic if we started to move in this direction. And they'll never let it happen. Okay, so let's go to something else I've talked about. And what I've talked about is quite clear. Toss them all. I would rather see Joe the plumber, okay, Mark the custodian, Betty the teacher serve in Congress than what we have because they know how to balance a budget. They're regular people with regular problems that understand our needs, and we'd get better representation. Now, some people will say, "Oh, Dave, that's just too idealistic." And I would say to you, yes, it is. But if we don't begin to do what we know we should be doing, which is honoring God, protecting the Constitution, and preserving the integrity for the judgment of parents and how they raise their kids, we're doomed to failure, and history shows it. Corruption has conquered every empire that's ever existed. Sinful behavior has sunk those empires. If we don't want to go down the same path, we need to make serious changes about how we see our society and what we find acceptable. And don't throw up your hands and say there's nothing we can do. Talk to the person next to you because the reach that we have is beyond what you can imagine. And then pray. Pray for divine guidance with good judgment, discernment, with godly principles to effect the change that we know we need to have. And then we might live in a world where we can exemplify to the world what it means to be a virtuous nation. God bless all of you. I'm Dave Hodges. This is the Common Sense Show.